Thanks a lot, Achille, for this fascinating talk, inquiry into the zoology of finance. Let's start the discussion. So we have a bit less than 25 minutes for questions. So please use the raise hands function at the bottom of your screen. We already have Brian.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. I thought this was
sorry, Brian, just a word. Perhaps, Achille, you could unshare your screen. Yes, that's great. Thanks.
Great. So I thought this was extremely interesting, and I'm really happy that you've raised this in the context of this conference. I think it's a really important set of examples for social ontology. And I'm also very sympathetic to the pertinence of social ontology for social policy, which is kind of what you were intimating at the end. Though I think those relations are complicated. But I guess in terms of thinking of the overall kind of big picture strategy of the talk, I sort of wonder if the problem is not that derivatives are so different from other traditional financial and legal entities and other social entities, but rather that our theories of social entities are just oversimplified. And I mean, I've argued in a bunch of places that Searles is highly problematic. So for example, I mean, I'm just thinking there are a lot of examples of this, but things like some of the characteristics you were talking about, why not needing to be in possession of the value for a time before the expiration date of a contract. You know, like I don't need to hold the money before the contract expires for both futures and options. I mean, that's a very standard feature of contracts. Contracts are future directed. There's all kinds of features with a contract, like credit risks. There are interests of contracting parties to direct the value of the contract over time. This is the case for mortgages and loans. I think even simple currency is often vastly oversimplified. Money, I think, should be regarded as a product of banking practices, commercial activity, systems of credit, and so on. So I think you could tell the very same sort of story with an ordinary loan or an ordinary unit of currency. And I think that you're right, there are some features that are different from features of currency, but the circularity you're talking about seems to me to be an artifact of Searle's particular analysis, not the better analyses that we've developed in the last, several years. So I guess that what I'm saying is that, you're suggesting that that we need to think about how to categorize this like it's a platypus and maybe it needs to be in a different category. I'm saying, maybe the category of mammals has been misunderstood. And when we do, we'll find that the platypus is not a particularly extraordinary member of the category at all. So these theses that you're saying need to be discarded, I completely agree that those theses do need to be discarded. But I'm just wondering whether we're not going to find that with basically every case of social entity.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. I'm going to say two quick things. I see your point and I'm sympathetic to it. Between the lines, I noticed that there is a big issue here in the background of my whole way of setting up the story in terms of taxonomies, the platypus and so on, and also its counterpart in the financial world, which is whether we want to do this from a metaphysical realist perspective or not. I mean, there is, I think, especially with regard to the two strategies that I mentioned, there is a lot to be said there, depending on whether you want to favor a realist understanding of what it is to say, to answer the question, what is a platypus or what is a derivative versus a non-realist understanding of that question. And that is by itself a big topic where I think the case of derivatives is similar to many other cases. So I think that's a big issue that I just saw in between the lines of what you said. But now to the lines themselves, yes, I agree that, first of all, obviously that formula that I used is overly simplified. And as I said, this is Social Ontology 101, and in fact, back in the late 80s or early 90s. But still, and I think it was, I used it intentionally because I think it is good enough to show that the issue lies in C, in the context. Now, you're right that many other cases are problematic. Mortgages and loans, anything involving promises of various sorts, contracts of various sorts, seem to be problematic for the formula in various ways. But I think none of them, I'm still convinced of this, but I'm happy to continue at some point. None of them has this sort of circularity problem that derivatives give rise to, because surely that there are certain mortgages and certain loans has an impact on the market. And as a result, other mortgages and other loans will be affected by this. But this loan, this mortgage is not going to be affected by what happens. This is, as it were, protected. So there is no backfiring. It is rather other entities of the same kind that are affected by it. Whereas in the case of the particular future or the particular option that we're considering, it's that very same entity that is affected by the changes in the market, in the sense that the contribution of C to the nature of that entity is affected by the existence of the entity itself. And it seems to me that this kind of circularity isn't as at least obvious in the other cases. But I take your point. It's certainly very important to dig into that direction and see similarities with regard to many other examples of contracts involving promises, expectations, speculations, future hypotheses, and so on. And surely the formula itself is not a good one in general, but I think it helps, nailing down the C factor.
Yeah.
Good, thanks for that answer. Please keep your question and answer short if possible, because there is a long list of Q&A. So Thomas is next.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I guess I wasn't entirely seeing why there was such a deep disanalogy towards the end between the two cases you mentioned, like the derivatives and the money. So in the case of the money, at the time that we impose the status in this sort of model, we fix certain things like that it's worth 50 euros and so forth. Other things are left open at that point, right? What the purchasing power is, and they're left to sort of be dynamically determined over time by other factors. And that's fine, right? That's not anything that the model can't handle. And I wonder why this isn't just the same for derivatives. So we fix certain things like what the purchasing power is going to be. That's the sort of thing that has to be determined at the time of imposition. Other things are left to dynamically evolve as in various ways. And in this case, it's the value. So it's switched around, but it's the same pattern, it looks like.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, so here we be really brief in my answer. I think that's a very interesting way of putting it, and I myself am starting to think about it that way. So, in a way, what is it exactly that needs to be fixed in order for, let's say, a certain formula to deliver the nature of a particular financial entity? Why should the purchasing power be, as it were, left open? We don't care about it, whereas the value should be, as it were, essential to the nature of what we're defining, as opposed to the other way around. So I think this is another way of looking at it, which is, goes back to the early point, what are the variables here and what are the weights of the relevant variables? So I agree with this suggestion as a nice way to look at it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ron. We can't hear you, Ron. We don't hear you.
He is unmuted.
You are unmuted, but we don't hear you. I think you may have a problem with your microphone. So I keep your hands, and let's move to Kenneth, and then back to you once it's solved.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Hi, Achille. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing all right over here. I'm in London now.
Nice books behind you.
Sorry?
Nice books behind you.
Oh yeah, those aren't real. I wanted to ask if maybe we could, this might be an unpopular way of going to try to defend Searle here a little bit, but I'm wondering if maybe it makes more sense to say that C is being impacted by the A term and not the B term, and that would resolve the circularity. Because of course A is understood independently of the context, whereas B only counts as B in the context, right? So if A is what's doing the work here, then we don't have quite the same problem. And so here's how I was understanding how A was doing the work. What's really affecting the context is the interest that the parties have in the agreement. The agreement itself doesn't directly affect the context in the way. It's really the interests that the parties have in the context, in the contract. And that interest is a part of the A term in the sense that it's part of what their agreement that they're coming to, that's the ground for, let's say the legal contract. So if you understand in the legal model, I think it makes more sense. The meeting of the minds that the parties have and their, let's say, background interests in that agreement count as a legally enforceable contract, or however you want to call it, in context C. Now, context C, no problem with understanding the context over time. And the reason that C can be impacted by their agreement is precisely because of their interests. If they made the agreement and then had no more interest in doing anything about it, then it would have no impact on C. It only has impact on C precisely because they have a maintained interest that was already part of that background. I don't want to call it background because that's going to get confusing with Searle's notion of background, but that's part of what led them to the agreement in the beginning, and that was part of A and not part of B.
Ken, this is excellent. I see that if indeed it's A doing the work or impacting, then we don't have circularity, or we don't have the kind of circularity that worried me. And you may very well be right that we should rephrase the last part of my story, at least consider a way of rephrasing it in terms of A's doing the work as opposed to B itself. I need to think about it, but it sounds like an excellent way to save, as it were, the formula against the charge of circularity, which is, of course, what we need to do here, because, of course, circularity, I think, is pretty dramatic in this case. Even though, I mean, Thomas earlier suggested another way of making the circularity less important because it becomes sort of relative. But you're right. That's a very good point. Thank you, Ken. I'm definitely going to think about this.
Good. So we have lost some hands en route. So please feel free to raise your hands again. Good. Brian, you have a follow-up. Perhaps a new question.
I just wanted to make a small point that's a little bit, that I just thought might be a little helpful. I think that one of the things that I was finding a little problematic was kind of identifying what exactly, in some of these cases, you were trying to give a theory of. And I think Searle's account also has problems, and that's one of the reasons I find that analysis problematic. Yeah. So I think that with a case like this, there are a lot of different kinds of facts whose grounding conditions we might be trying to identify. And sometimes I wasn't clear which we were talking about, like whether what we were talking about was the grounds of the fact X is an option of a particular type, or the grounds of the fact X is the value of an option of a particular type. And those two are going to have different sets of grounding conditions. And both of them may well have kind of diachronic factors, causal, contextual factors, and so on. But I felt like some of the objections were kind of causal, contextual, diachronic factors involved in the determination of the grounding of the value, where the analysis was purportedly an analysis of the nature of the derivative. Anyway, I just thought that might help. That might be a route for untangling some of the apparent paradoxes.
Well, again, thank you. My intention was to have not the value of derivatives, but the derivatives themselves, their nature, so to speak, explained. So I was looking for what grounds the derivative, not the value of the derivative. However, by taking it as sort of essential to a derivative that it is something whose value is derived from the underlyings. And that's why many of my comments were shifting towards how values are determined, and why, in fact, even the circularity in question was about the value. But the point is that if we cannot pin down how the value of a derivative is derived, then we're not grounding the derivative itself. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And I think there's something in that direction that is the right way to, or a good way to go. But I still wonder, and here I sort of find, I mean, maybe Jonathan Schaffer will have something to say about this, but I find it really problematic to talk about kind of grounding relations where one relatum is an object. And I know that he's argued for a very kind of pluralistic set of relata for grounding relations. But I just find that when we're analyzing social entities, it's extremely confusing to talk about the grounding of a derivative.
Yeah.
As opposed to talking about the grounding of a particular fact, like that a derivative exists, that a particular thing is a derivative, is an American option of such and such type. You know, I just don't even know how to approach the analysis of, you know, the grounding of a derivative. And so I think I agree with you that maybe I was overemphasizing those two. There may be one fact, but I just wonder if the clarification of what that fact is might still be helpful a little bit.
Thank you. Well, I didn't really, during my talk, use the grounding terminology precisely, I think for reasons similar to the ones that you are now putting forward, but it would add something. I actually think that there is something deeply mistaken in the formula, in the way it is typically presented, and also perhaps to some extent in the way I used it, even though I tried to be a little more neutral. And it's the following. Let's say for Searle, A and B range over particulars, over individual entities. They're singular terms, so to speak. And as a result, despite what he and others say, the formula is committed to dualism. Since counts as is not identity, A and B must be distinct. And so in my hand right now, I've got two things. I think that's deeply mistaken. My way of understanding the formula is actually slightly different, actually radically different. Instead of taking B to be a singular term, I take B to be a general term, a predicate. So instead of saying this counts as, and now here comes a blank that you fill in with the name of a social object, I have a social object predicate. This counts as a $5 bill. Donald Trump counts as President of the United States. And this is a property. So A counts as P, where P is now a property in context C, as opposed to A counts as B, social object particular in context C. And it seems to me that by switching to predicates, apart from the fact that we see that in that formula really is Goodman's theory of social objects, his theory of arts, when is art. So it might, we finally reveal what's behind this little formula, because for Goodman, of course, that's what explains or accounts for our works. But it seems to me that if you put it this way, then you don't have a grounding relation between two particular entities, but rather you have a count as relation, which explains by virtue of what certain predicates apply to certain objects, or if you want to be more realist, by virtue of what certain properties are satisfied by certain objects. That's very different from the two particular cases. But again, this is related to how much of a realist picture do we want here, how much of a nominalist account are we interested in, etc.
Thanks. I had a question, Achille, on the relations between derivatives and the contracts. So it wasn't completely clear to me how you see the relation, but you seem to think that derivatives are the contracts themselves, no?
The derivative are contracts themselves? well, no, at the end I was suggesting that if by contract you mean this piece of paper where you and I signed something, so it's a document which has a certain meaning, not by virtue of the ink and paper, but by virtue of the semantics, and so it is a social object. Is that your worry that this is?
Yeah, so kind of. So what I tend to think is that the derivative are rather not the contract or the piece of paper, but the claim and right that arise from the contract and the piece of paper. So in all the example you took, what is it that you buy? So you give money against what? And it seems to me that what you buy is a right. You want that a right to get money in the future at the price in the future, for instance, in the case of the first case you described. Certainly you want that right to be documented. You want that right to be enforced. But it seems to me really the rights, the claims are really the target of those exchanges, okay? There are further conditions. And so that seems intuitive to me. And if this is true, that it seems to me that in Searle's schema, the problem is really with the A, right? Because the question is, what counts as an obligation here? It seems pretty much like promissory obligation, which just arise from social acts, from contracts, precisely. Not clear that there is anything material that counts as an obligation or a claim. Nevertheless, these are the things we seem to exchange in such cases. You see the idea?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I understand fully, but two things. First of all, you're right that futures and options here may be significantly different. So options might when you just purchase the right, so not just, but you start by, the contract really is about the right to eventually purchase, if you wish, the stuff at a later date. And options are much more similar to a large variety of other contracts than, in my opinion, futures are. Futures, insofar as they're binding, they're not just agreements of some sort, of some ordinary sort. They are, I'm already, as it were, buying stuff a year ahead on the basis of our speculations. But never mind this distinction between the two. Your worry here is, what is A, really? Your worry is whether the contract should fill in the role of A or the role of B. Is that correct? Because you think that contracts are already endowed with semantics, and therefore they are already social objects in some sense. So that cannot be, A cannot be a contract. Is that your worry?
Yeah, I think A is what arises from a contract, is the obligation or the claim that arises from the contract.
The way I wanted to put it is this. I think maybe I didn't put it properly in the presentation. So I said B is, say, the future, and I said A is the sum of paper and signatures that constitute the contract. What I take A to be in the easy case is this. So this is A, okay? Now, this is not just any contract. So the fact that this counts as a future as opposed to as a wedding, for instance, is what matters. And it is C that's going to tell us that this is not a wedding, not a document for a wedding, but rather for a future or perhaps for an option. C is supposed to do that. So A is what constitutes the material basis for a contract, which will then be a very specific contract, a very specific type of contract, as determined by C, if things worked out, which I think I saw may be problematic. But that's what I have in mind. Is that clear now? So yeah, not the contract cum semantics, but without semantics, just the material support, so to speak.
Yeah, I see. Thanks, Achille. So we have a last question by Kenneth.
Thanks. I actually was going to ask something else, but now I just thought I wanted to jump in here a little bit if I can. I thought, first of all, that A's could be other B's, and the whole thing could be kind of iterated or nested, right? There's no need for the A to be some kind of simple. The A can be already got status within an institutional system. I still think it makes sense to think of this in terms of the legal model. I guess that's my own bias, perhaps, but you know, the idea would be that, you know, it's not that the B term is really the future, right? I mean, that's what we call it, but its status, the thing that gives it its power is its status within the institution. And its status within the institution is that it's a binding contract, right? So the paper or the agreement behind the paper, the meeting of the minds, we don't really even need the paper, right? I mean, we can make a contract with paper, right? I mean, so the agreement we come to, or the communication, our mutual commitment, has a status that it's legally binding. And then that status, that legally binding status, is then what, you know, within a larger, you know, legal and economic context is what gives it its power, right? So it's to say that it has the status of a future, it's got the function of a future, but that's not a special status in a sense, except insofar as it might someday come to have that status as a result of regulations, right? So if the government decides, yeah, you know, these future contracts are dangerous, we got to do something about them, then it all of a sudden, now we're going to have another question. Does this contract count as a future for purposes of regulation, right? So in our discussion and the way you've analyzed it, the future part or the option part isn't really the status that's doing the work. It's merely the contract that's doing the work. And then the fact that it has impact on future events is what creates the potential problem, basically.
Yeah, you may be right, but it is, however, also true that the contract itself cannot be fully, as it were, carried out or implemented until a date D arrives, right? This is one of the reasons why regulation is complicated, because you can't just say, okay, from now on, forget futures are illegal, because we need to wait until for the expiration of all the ones that are currently going. So that's the sense in which I thought it's more than that, but you seem to be.
No, all contracts are for a future event. In a certain sense, if I buy something from you, I'm going to hand the money over before you hand over the good, or vice versa. So in some sense, there's always an agreement before we do it. There's always a gap of time. That's not the issue. And, you know, I think it's just a matter of the fact that the way in which this gap happens creates a potential for misuse or manipulation. And that's what then calls for regulation. So in a way, we have two questions here. We have the metaphysical question, how do we understand futures and options? And I actually don't think it's quite as complicated as maybe you made it out. And then the other question is, how do these problems arise that then call for the need of regulation within this as a result of the kind of interests that are being introduced to then have an impact on the event that is being contracted about in the future?
Okay, fair enough. Just one quick reply. It's true, pretty much every contract is about the future, but but that's not true with regard to the peculiarity of the future being, as it were, the way we expect it to be, as being part of the contract. I mean, usually we rely on facts and we want to make sure that all the values are not just what you think or what I think or what we expect or something else. Here, by contrast, that's the crucial element. But again, this goes back to your previous point with regard to A, doing the work as opposed to B. And I think this is a very important line of thinking, and thank you. We should definitely continue. I hope, you see, after a talk, we could go out for a beer, and that's exactly what this is supposed to be. Unfortunately, we cannot do that, but thank you. I'm really very thankful to all of you for your comments. Fantastic. I hope we were not too disappointed by the presentation at this point. But
not in the least, Achille. One, thanks to you. It was really a brilliant presentation and a very nice discussion. So thanks a lot, and see you very soon, hopefully. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thank you. Very good seeing you.